Critics and historians describe the 21-month-long emergency as the darkest chapter in the history of Indian democracy. Imposed on the night of 25th June 1975 by then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, it suspended fundamental rights of citizens and triggered large-scale protests against the dictatorial methods of the government.
भाइयों और बहनों, राष्ट्रपति जी ने आपातकाल की घोषणा की है.
With this announcement on the All India Radio on the morning of 26 June 1975, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared emergency in India. She said, "The President has declared a state of emergency. There is no need to panic." The decision to proclaim emergency was taken under Article 352 of the Constitution because of internal disturbance. Soon after, her words led to a suspension of the fundamental rights provided by the Constitution to the citizens of the country. The right to free speech and personal liberty was clamped down, and only censored news was available. All rights except the right to life were suspended. Hours before the radio broadcast, emergency was officially issued a little after midnight on the 25th of June 1975 by then President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed on the recommendation of then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. In one sweep, leaders like Jai Prakash Narayan, Morarji Desai, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, L.K. Advani, Ashok Mehta and all other opposition leaders of any significance were put behind bars. A number of activists and journalists were also arrested under the Defence of India Rules and Maintenance of Internal Security Act. The emergency lasted from 25th June 1975 until its withdrawal on the 21st of March 1977. In retrospect, emergency is often termed as the darkest period of post-independent Indian history. The almost 2-year-long period was also perhaps the most momentous episode in the political evolution of the Indian National Congress. But why did Indira Gandhi proclaim emergency? Just days before emergency was imposed on the country, the Allahabad High Court found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractices. The 12th June 1975 judgment of the Allahabad High Court declared her election null and void. Indira Gandhi challenged this verdict in the Supreme Court. On the 24th of June, the Apex Court granted her a partial stay on the High Court order. According to the Supreme Court, she could remain an MP till her appeal was decided, but could not take part in the proceedings of the Lok Sabha. She was, however, allowed to continue as Prime Minister. Indira's son Sanjay Gandhi, who did not hold any official position at that time, allegedly interfered in the functioning of the government. It said that he also played a vital role in imposition of emergency. Indira Gandhi had also consulted some special advisors, including then Law Minister H.R. Gokhale and West Bengal Chief Minister Siddharth Shankar Ray, before proclaiming emergency in the country. In a space of 21 months, over 1 lakh people were put in jail without trial during emergency. Thousands of media persons were jailed and the judiciary was silenced. Veteran journalists say it was a period when India ceased to be a democracy and was converted into a virtual autocracy. But why did Indira Gandhi impose the emergency? Let's find out in this report. It was on the night of 25th June 1975 when the emergency was officially issued by the then President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. In the years preceding the emergency, the country was facing a social and economic crisis. Monsoons had failed, prices were skyrocketing, economic growth was at a standstill. To make matters worse, students-led protests in Gujarat and Bihar played a pivotal role in galvanizing a nationwide opinion against the Congress and then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi.
आपातकाल में ही 75 में छात्र सक्रिय थे. अंडरग्राउंड पैम्पलेट्स बांटना, पेपर बांटना, लोगों को सजग बनाना, ये सब. और बनारस गढ़ था छात्र आंदोलन का. मुझे याद है 15 अगस्त को कैसे इसका प्रतिकार हुआ. बनारस यूनिवर्सिटी में उस वक्त वाइस चांसलर होते थे डॉक्टर के श्रीमाली, देश के पहले एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर. पंडित जी की कैबिनेट में वो मिनिस्टर थे और वो हमारे वाइस चांसलर थे. डॉक्टर के श्रीमाली जब झंडा फहराने के लिए 15 अगस्त को खड़े हुए तो हमारे छात्र संघ के उपाध्यक्ष होते थे एक महेंद्र सिंह नाम के व्यक्ति. इन सबकी गिरफ्तारी का वारंट था और सब अंडरग्राउंड थे. पर छात्रों का एक समूह पहले से निर्धारित करके उस अंडरग्राउंड माहौल में भी किस तरह से ये लोग सक्रिय होकर छात्रों के संपर्क में रहते थे, मेरे मुझे स्मरण है, हम सब लोग उस दायरे में थे।
The government claimed that strikes and protests paralyzed the country and hurt the economy. Indira Gandhi's loyalists advised her to impose an internal emergency in order to deal with the massive political opposition, desertion and disorder against her and the party.
It's always necessary to remember the emergency, because it's a lesson for all of us that if we are not vigilant, our fundamental rights can be snatched away from us by a dictatorial government. Which is, as the saying goes, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Emergency came in one fell swoop. Indira Gandhi introduced it. But there can be small emergencies all the time in the country taking place by, autocratic governments. And if we look the other way, then these governments will snatch more and more of our rights away from us.
In the 1971 Lok Sabha elections, Indira Gandhi defeated opposition candidate Raj Narayan from the Rai Bareli constituency. Subsequently, Raj Narayan filed a petition in the Allahabad High Court accusing Indira Gandhi of electoral malpractices, bribing voters and misusing government machinery. Indira Gandhi was cross-examined in the High Court, the first such instance for an Indian Prime Minister. On the 12th of June 1975, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha found the Prime Minister guilty of misuse of government machinery during her election campaign and declared her election null and void. The High Court also barred Indira Gandhi from contesting any election for the next 6 years. The court, however, gave the Congress 20 days' time to make arrangements to replace Indira Gandhi as the Prime Minister. Indira Gandhi challenged the High Court verdict in the Supreme Court. On the 24th of June, the Supreme Court granted her a partial stay on the High Court order. It said, till her appeal was decided, she could remain a member of Parliament but could not take part in the proceedings of the Lok Sabha.
सच बात यह है कि इमरजेंसी इसलिए लगाई गई क्योंकि इंदिरा गांधी को प्रधानमंत्री की कुर्सी छीनने जाने का खतरा था, या यूँ कहना चाहिए कि उनकी कुर्सी पर खतरा मंडरा रहा था। और वो खतरा इसलिए था क्योंकि 12 जून 1975 को इलाहाबाद हाई कोर्ट ने उनके चुनाव को अवैध घोषित कर दिया। जगमोहन लाल सिन्हा, जिनको कि बहुत डराया गया, धमकाया गया, उनको लालच दिए गए, उनके परिवार के लोगों को आतंकित किया गया और कहा गया कि ये बचेंगे नहीं, परंतु जगमोहन लाल सिन्हा ने उसकी कोई परवाह नहीं की और उन्होंने जो देखा, जो उनके सामने सबूत आए, उसके आधार पर उन्होंने फैसला किया कि इंदिरा गांधी का चुनाव जो 1971 का रायबरेली में था वो अवैध हो गया था।
On the 25th of June 1975, Jayaprakash Narayan addressed a mammoth rally at the Ramleela ground in Delhi. Quoting Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, JP thundered, "Singhasan khali karo ki janata aati hai." The call to Indira Gandhi to vacate the throne was joined by thousands of people and opposition leaders. JP also urged the armed forces to revolt against Indira Gandhi's government. That very night, emergency was declared in the country.
कई लोगों ने तो मिलने से, ऐसे लोग जो बड़े सुनाम धन्य थे और जिनको पत्र लिखा था जेपी के बड़े करीबी सहयोगी ने, जो अभिन्न मित्र थे, उनके मिलने से इनकार कर दिया हम सबसे, क्योंकि अपरिचित लोगों से मिलने में सबको भय होता था। उनमें से एक आध लोगों ने तो ये संदेश भिजवाया कि आप जयप्रकाश जी के गांव के रहने वाले हैं, कहीं किसी को बताइएगा मत। हम सब छात्र आंदोलन में जुड़े थे तो कुलदीप नैयर को जानते थे। कुलदीप नैयर से मिलने की इच्छा थी, पता चला वो सब लोग गिरफ्तार हैं। तो दिल्ली में 26 जून को जब आपातकाल लगा तो मैं था, विद्यार्थी के तौर पर यहाँ दिल्ली पहली बार देखने आया था। किसी महानगर को देखने का पहला अनुभव था। जो डर, भय और जिस तरह का माहौल हमने देखा वो आज भी मेरी स्मृतियों में है। लोगों ने जुबान से बताया, चंद्रशेखर, पीलू मोदी, मोरारजी देसाई, चरण सिंह, अपने समय के सारे बड़े नेता रातों रात उठाए और बंद कर दिए गए और कहीं एक खबर तक नहीं, कोई सूचना तक नहीं, और देश भर में एक दहशत भय का माहौल, कोई किसी से खुलकर बात नहीं करना चाहता था। हमने कम्युनिस्ट आंदोलन की चीज़ें पढ़ी थी कि किस तरह से रूस में या कम्युनिस्ट व्यवस्था के देशों में जब निरंकुश शासक होते थे तो कैसे भय का माहौल होता था। वो भय का माहौल जो स्मृति में मुझे दिल्ली में पहली घड़ी पहला दिन जो आपातकाल का हमने देखा और मेरी स्मृतियों में अटका, वो आज भी है।
She claimed that it was because the country was in chaos and Jai Prakash Narayan was leading an agitation which was disrupting the basic activities of the country. But the real reason was that there was a court case against her which she had lost in the High Court, Allahabad High Court. And that meant that for some time she could not be a parliamentarian, and her political position had become precarious, and she was fearful that other members of her party would try and snatch power from her. She was a very suspicious woman.
Prime Minister Indira Gandhi recommended to the President to proclaim a state of emergency in the country. After midnight, power supply to all major newspaper offices was disconnected and was restored only 2 to 3 days later after the censorship apparatus had been set up. Early in the morning on the 26th of June, a large number of opposition leaders and workers were arrested. At 7 a.m. on the 26th of June, Indira Gandhi went on air through All India Radio to declare to the people that a state of emergency had been imposed in the country. The emergency remained in effect from the 25th of June 1975 until 21st March 1977. After the emergency officially ended, fresh elections were called. The Congress party lost by a huge margin. Janata Party's Morarji Desai went on to become the first non-Congress Prime Minister of India. The proclamation of emergency meant that not only elections were banned, but there was strict censoring of the press as well. The period was termed as the darkest hour in Indian history. Let's see how the state of emergency impacted the country as well as the society.
The impact of emergency was seen all across the country. Most of then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's political opponents were imprisoned. In the days that followed, civil liberties were suspended, media censored, and amendments were brought that threatened to alter the basic character of the constitution. Draconian laws like Maintenance of Internal Security Act were strengthened. All major opposition leaders including Jai Prakash Narayan, Morarji Desai, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, L.K. Advani and George Fernandez were sent to jail under MISA. Chandrasekhar, Indira Gandhi's own party colleague and a member of the Congress Working Committee, was also arrested and put in jail for speaking his mind. The government suspended the right to move court for enforcement of fundamental rights. The arrested leaders were not allowed to meet anyone, including their family members.
It impacted totally. All dissent came to an end. Her opponents were put into jail. The worst part of all was that anyone that was considered an enemy of her government was not only put into jail, but she introduced a law, MISA, Maintenance of Internal Security Act, under which it was said that the court cannot intervene. That matter went eventually to the Supreme Court.
When the emergency was in force, Indira Gandhi's government assumed dictatorial powers and crushed all dissent. The fundamental rights of people were crushed, torture and inhuman treatment of dissenting citizens became a common occurrence. She even amended the Representation of the People Act and 2 other laws in a retrospective manner to ensure that the Supreme Court had no other option but to overturn the Allahabad High Court verdict on the trial of Raj Narayan. Earlier, Raj Narayan had challenged the election of Indira Gandhi in the Allahabad High Court. Apart from this, efforts were also made to amend the constitution. The 42nd Amendment of the Constitution of India was enacted during the emergency. It attempted to reduce the power of the Supreme Court and High Courts to pronounce upon the constitutional validity of laws. It also laid down the fundamental duties of Indian citizens. Simultaneously with the proclamation, Articles 14, 19, 21 and 22 of the Constitution were suspended. Every Indian was now devoid of their fundamental rights. In the period of emergency, even media was one of the greatest sufferers. Gandhi imposed all bans on media. She also implemented strict censoring rules on the press, allowing no unfavorable opinion against her administration to be published. Simultaneously, a code of conduct was announced for the press. Many newspaper editors were arrested for writing anti-government articles. Singer Kishore Kumar was banned by the All India Radio after he refused to support the Youth Congress.
उस टाइम तक कांग्रेस पार्टी was by far the biggest party and the most powerful. Because of the emergency and protest against the emergency, a lot of other parties came to the fore. It was no longer a one-party rule.
Emergency also had a significant negative impact on the country's economic front. The strikes and protests had paralyzed the government and hurt the economy of the country greatly. The lawyers and judges who were protecting civil rights were also not spared. During the emergency, when civil liberties were suspended, Sanjay Gandhi, son of Indira Gandhi, began what was described by many as a gruesome campaign to sterilize poor men. There were reports of police cordoning of villages and virtually dragging the men to surgery. An atmosphere of fear and terror prevailed in the country during the period, which is often termed as the darkest hour in the Indian history. However, 21 months of emergency affected Indira Gandhi as well as her government badly. In a major turn of events, for the first time since independence, the ruling Congress lost the general election in 1977. The opposition called for a restoration of democracy, and Indians saw the election results as a repudiation of the emergency.
The Indian Constitution extensively explains features of national emergency in Articles 352, 356 and 360. The Constitution adopted the provisions regarding emergency from Germany. The Indian Constitution talks about three types of emergencies in Articles 352, 356 and 360. According to Article 352, if the President agrees that a grave emergency exists whereby the security of India or of any part of the territory is threatened, whether by war, external aggression or armed rebellion, he can declare emergency rule in the whole of India or any part of the Indian territory. According to Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, if the President, on report from the Governor of any state or otherwise, is satisfied that a situation has arisen in which the state cannot be governed in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, then President's rule can be exercised in that state. And as per Article 360 of the Constitution, if the President is satisfied that a situation has arisen whereby the financial stability or credit of India or of any part of the territory is threatened, he may declare financial emergency. National emergency has been imposed 3 times in India. During the Indo-China War in 1962, during the India-Pakistan War in 1971, and in 1975, when former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared 21-month-long emergency in the country due to then prevailing internal disturbance. According to the Constitution, only the President of India has the power to impose emergency rule in India with the written recommendation of the Union Cabinet. But this rule was not followed in 1975. President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed signed the declaration of emergency proposed by Indira Gandhi, even though it was not approved by the Union Cabinet. Within 30 days of the proclamation of emergency, both houses of parliament need to approve it by a 2/3 majority. After being passed by the parliament, emergency can be imposed for an initial period of 6 months and can last for a maximum period of 3 years, with repeated parliamentary approvals by a 2/3 majority in both houses every 6 months. With that, time for a very short break on the program. We'll be right back. The period of emergency tested the powers of the Indian democracy. But the suffering triggered by the undemocratic decision also led the country and the Indians to learn a few valuable lessons. We leave you with this report. Thanks for your time.
In the 21 months that emergency was imposed in the country, Indira Gandhi remained a powerful ruler. But the voices of dissent raised against her and her subsequent fall in the 1977 general election proved that the idea of an authoritarian government cannot work in the Indian democracy. Experts say that the defeat of authoritarian forces is by the people of India is the biggest learning from the emergency era. It was only after emergency that a non-Congress government came into power. This was a government of opposition parties, supported by the people, of leaders who were persecuted by Indira Gandhi government during the emergency. Another lesson that emergency taught us was that when a government becomes autocratic in a democracy, people find solutions to the repression.
Well, generally, the heroes were considered all the political party leaders who Mrs. Gandhi put into jail. And the villain of the piece is usually considered Sanjay Gandhi, who was his mother's younger son and played a major role in planning how to go about introducing the emergency, who should be arrested, who were the key people to be in control of the situation.
The elections, which were held before emergency in 1971, gave a clear mandate to Indira Gandhi. To her credit, she had defeated Pakistan and led to the formation of Bangladesh. On domestic front, her popularity was soaring with slogans like Garibi Hatao. But by 1974, everything changed and Indira Gandhi had to impose emergency to save her government. The anger of the public grew because of the suppression faced by them during this period. And finally, in 1977, Indira Gandhi had to face defeat. Politically, this period also teaches that despite the achievements and popularity, it is important for a government to fulfill the expectations of the people. In democracy, power lies with the people. The emergency saw the use of draconian laws to suppress the rights of the public. MISA and the Defence of India rule was widely used to send opponents and critics of the government to jail. The 38th Amendment barred the judicial review of proclamation of emergency, while the 39th Amendment ended the power of the judiciary to subject the Prime Minister to electoral scrutiny. Similarly, the 40th and the 41st Amendment brought about more changes to the Constitution. And by the time the 42nd Amendment was passed, people started calling it a Constitution of Indira. This was an amendment that gave importance to policy guidelines over fundamental rights of a common man. But after the elections in 1977, when the Janata Party government was formed, the Supreme and High Courts were given their rights back through the 43rd Amendment. This was followed by 44th Amendment, through which the Constitution came back to its original state. This amendment made the most important change in the Constitution. It prevented the repeat of the emergency-like situation. In the provisions related to the emergency, the words armed rebellion replaced the term internal unrest. The lessons learned here was that if the autocratic power tried to change the fundamentals of the Constitution, then the public has the power to preserve the Constitution. The emergency also tested journalism. Emergency is a lesson for today's journalists. In one of his articles, Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu has in very few words mentioned the relationship between journalism and emergency. He has written that in those days of emergency, media, which is called the fourth pillar of democracy, also missed the historic opportunity of cooperating with the common citizens of the country. They had also kneeled down before the autocratic government. The media, by and large, meekly surrendered to the censor, barring a few honorable exceptions like the fearless Ramnath Goenka's The Indian Express, The Statesman and Mainstream. This attitude of the media was later famously described by L.K. Advani, who said that the press crawled when it was asked to bend. And today also, those media institutions are remembered with a lot of respect.